As an investor or an LP, you've probably heard GPs and sponsors say that they're conservative with their underwriting, that they're really selective with the deals that they bring on, or that they manage the downside risk really well. But to you as an investor, how do you know what that exactly means, right? Like you hear the words coming out of their mouth, but like what is behind the scenes? Like how are they being selective and all that stuff? So as a LP and GP myself, I want to make this video for you to show you how I think through things and how my team runs through these opportunities to present to our group. My name is Leo Young, founder and managing partner of Cornell Communities. We're a vertically integrated operator of mobile home parks across several states, and you can learn more about us and join our investor waitlist at cornellcommunities.com/invest. Let's dive in. So first off, selective. How do you bring this deal to the table? Like how did this deal come about, right? There's a few different sources for us for looking for opportunities. One is brokers and wholesalers, the other is referrals, and the third is direct to seller outreach. So when it comes to brokers and wholesalers, the good part is that the sellers are usually, if not always, ready to sell. You know, brokers, like they have that conversation with the seller to understand, like they sign a listing agreement and they get paid at closing, so that they don't want to waste their time, right? And for wholesalers, they have the deal under contract, so the deal will go through. So it's a matter of figuring out, is this the right deal for you? What's the right price? And following through with it. And on the flip side, the challenge is that a lot of these deals are just more than we want to pay for it because there's been a lot of interest into the space lately. There's been so many buyers coming in from both the high end and the low end spectrum. So on the high end spectrum, you have the institutions, right? For the past 20 years, these REITs, family offices, private equity funds, they've been gobbling up the space and like buying up the most beautiful assets, the generational assets and stuff. So they're creeping down market because they want to deploy capital. Their investors are pressuring them. They're like, hey, are you bringing us a new opportunities this quarter? Like, what's going on, man? Clock's ticking. So they're creeping down market. They're bidding on smaller deals. And for us, we're just getting outbid because they have cheaper cost of capital. Their investors don't need as high returns as our investors do. So, they're able to get away with just much more aggressive underwriting, so to speak. So for the smaller side, you have these like people that are newbies, house flippers or, people coming from different asset classes. They're like, wow, mobile home parks are a great asset class, right? It's like high cash flow, great depreciation, et cetera. So they come in, they don't fully know how to underwrite accurately based on true operating realities, right? So they buy these deals at whatever prices. They'll just take it at listing price and they'll run with it. Maybe in a few years' time, we'll see how they do. But for now, like that puts pressure on us as well because we're usually not the highest price bidders. So how do we even get deals from brokers and wholesalers like if we're not the best bidders? And the key is reputation and consistency. So for us, we're very well networked in the space. A lot of brokers and deal sourcers know us, and they'll naturally bring deals to us to look at. Now, we give our figures to them of where we think we can take the deal down at. And for the most part, it's not the best. But for us, as we transact with different brokers and deal sourcers, they know that we can transact, that we can close. Because for them, surety of close is key. It's not just the price. I mean, they get paid at closing. So if the deal doesn't close, they don't get paid. So they want to know that a deal closes. And beyond that, too, they want to know what the process is like working with you. So, there's some of the larger companies, like they have, a bunch of super smart people, like they'll ask super minutiae questions that just like annoy the seller. So I have a friend who's selling his commercial property to Blackstone, and their analysts or associates come back with the darndest questions. And he's like, come on, man, like, do you want the property or not? Like, why do you care what material the gravel is, like the drain is, like all this and that? Like, you can figure it out yourself. You don't have to bother me with this. So sellers actually care about that. If you have a huge laundry list of diligence items, like, all right, not the deal for me, or you better pay 20% above the market price. So for us, we have diligence items that matter, things that help us understand, like, do we want to move forward with a deal or not? And we focus on the signal over the noise. Okay, so now moving on to referrals. Referrals are just people that are connected to sellers that know us and they connect us. This is usually the tiniest portion of our deal sourcing, but still nonetheless important. We do get people throwing on opportunities this way too. So for us, we like this because we're not doing a lot of the upfront building rapport and keeping in touch and all that stuff, this stuff that takes a long time to do. But also the downside is that we have to make sure that the deal still makes sense for us while we factor in everything. So, once we come to an agreement with the seller, like we have to make sure that the person bringing us the deal is also taken care of. So like, does everything still make sense? Now, when it comes to direct to seller outreach, this is what we've been doing increasingly often now because it's just so hard to find good opportunities. So we built an off-market system to reach out to sellers directly through various sources like mailers, cold calls, texting, etc., like everything, right? We want to just be casting a wide net out there, leaving no stone unturned, that kind of deal. So the challenge with this is that a lot of the sellers, I mean, look, they get cold calls all day. I mean, so do we. And like people are wanting to buy our assets all day and like give stupid prices. And the challenge with this is that there's a lot of churn, is that the sellers, like, they're not always ready for it. They're not super motivated and like, hey, like you're reaching out, give me a number. And there's a lot of just wasted time, so to speak. There's a lot of noise in this process. And also that they're kind of somewhat spoiled because they only entertain the crazy numbers. And then when the actual buyer looks behind it, and so like there's a lot of cold callers, they'll hire some offshore people to call you. They'll like throw out a stupid number. And then like the actual principal or the buyer looks at it, they're like, heck no, there's no way. So then they back out, but then that number is stuck in the seller's head. So they're like, yeah, I'm not selling for $1 less than $4 billion. You're like, how'd you come up with that? Someone offered it. Did they close? Are they a real buyer? So that's the tough part to kind of bridge the gap. But for us too, we like direct to seller deals because we're able to talk to them and figure out what truly matters for them. Right? Because price is just one factor of it. For them, this is going to be a big tax burden. They're going to have a lot of capital gains. So like, how do we structure it right? How do we make their transition to the next chapter of their life the smoothest that we can and make it as win-win as possible? So there's a lot of different levers that we pull in that regard. All right, so now that we found a deal, how do we analyze it? How do we do our due diligence to make sure that it is a good deal? How are we selective about it, right? So there's a lot of boxes to check. Everyone has a different set of due diligence checklist items, right, that they run through. For us, our goal of the due diligence process is to figure out exactly what we're walking into, uncover as many skeletons in the closets as we can, because, as investors, we just want to factor in everything that we should expect during the business plan period. So, we don't want to buy the property and then 2 years later, some unforeseen CapEx item comes up and it costs like $100,000 that like we didn't budget for. Like, that's not good. So we want to find out as many of those as we can. And typically a few big reasons that we back out of deals. One is that there's just too much hair. So it just means that there's a lot of deferred maintenance. I mean, mobile home parks, they're typically very old. They're like 50, 70 plus years old. So, typically the individual who owns the property has not kept up good care of the property. And that's also leading why they want to even sell in the first place, because they're just staring down the barrel of a huge line item that they have to prepare for, and it doesn't drive revenue for them. So they're like, yeah, screw it. It's time to sell. So for you, it's your job to figure out like what it is, how much it is, etc. And that could be things like road work, utility work. If they owned any homes, so park-owned homes, that's a huge line item to factor in. You want to know how much it costs to repair each home and get it back online. What homes that you should just write off to being like a demo unit. You would just demolish and take it out because it's just scrap value, right? So after we factor in the cost of the business plan of like how much we should set aside, is it still worth it? Can we come to terms? Because look, if we didn't factor it in when the seller sends their financials and we actually dig into the property, we're like, hey, we need to set this aside. Like, can we come to an agreement? Sometimes it's no. The other factor is regulatory risk. So I mean things like utility, rent controls, flood zones, etc. So these constraints are some of the most important things to wrap your mind around for your business plan because they significantly change it. So for example, the utility systems, do you need to replace it? Where, when, how much is it going to cost? So for us, we backed out a deal after we found out there was a mobile home park on a well system that needed to be replaced. It was on its last legs and it served probably a third of the community. So basically through the process, a third of the community would not have water. So we'd probably have to move them into hotels and like pay for the hotel while getting the permitting done, getting the actual replacement of the well. So that's going to cost 6 figures plus. So is that worth our money? Is that worth our effort for something that doesn't drive revenue, right? Because you have to always think like, what is the output per input that you have? And, for us, like we have scarce resources, we have limited bandwidth, we have limited time. So is this project worth taking on? Same thing with rent control. There's a lot of these laws passing around in different states that say like, hey, you can only raise your lot rents by 3%, for example, which sounds nice in theory, but it doesn't factor in that a lot of these mobile home parks are very old. they have a ton of deferred maintenance. So if you need to put in $100, $200, $300,000 that you're not going to see a return on, like, why would you do that? I mean, you as an investor, would you be like, hey, okay, we have to write a $300,000 check and actually not get return on it? That's just a cost of doing this deal. Like, no. I'm not investing in that, right? So for markets with rent control, it's something to factor in to see if the business plan still works with it. And even if it's just looming rent control, it's not concrete yet, it's important to still factor in because you want to make sure that your numbers are defensible. Let's say, hey, we're able to get 15% on this business plan, but it's assuming 10% growth, gradually moving it up to the closer to market rates. But if rent control passes in year 2 and you're capped at 3%, guess what? Like, your returns tank. So it's very important to factor it in. Third thing is flood zones. And this is very tricky because there's so much regulation around it. And with climate change coming, it's just getting worse and worse. There's like the 100-year zones, the zones that flood like once every 100 years are flooding once every 50. So like there's a lot of changes happening. So beyond just compliance, what insurance costs do we need? Should we need to elevate the pads? And like, we need to factor in these costs, but also that we need to factor in the actual increase in risk in a flood. A lot of the times, like, we just don't even take on these deals. It's not worth the risk. And this risk is very hard to quantify accurately. So for us in our underwriting, it's just a huge unknown for us to get comfortable with. And last but not least is the quality of the financials. So anybody could throw a number on a screen, when you're looking at a profit and loss statement, like, you could see the line items and you can see what's going on. But sometimes, the expenses are underreported. You ask the seller for their bank statements and you're like, what's this one? What's this one? What's that one? And it's just not factored in. Or other times it might be that a bunch of tenants are delinquent. They just don't pay rent. And they're a few months late. They're pending to be evicted. And when you take the property over, you're going to lose 15% of your NOI in day one. So factoring these things in is very important when you're looking at setting up your business plan for success. And that leads me to being conservative with your underwriting. Now, the goal of good underwriting at its core is to factor in a realistic scenario of a business plan that you as the operator can execute on. So with that question in mind, how do you make sure that you're setting up something that's realistic and probable? So it begins with assumptions, right? Assumptions are just like, hey, we assume 6% rent growth. We assume, the trash bill to go up by this amount. So looking at the line items, how reasonable are they? And how battle tested are your assumptions? That's very important. So, for us, when we operate our mobile home parks, like, we learn, okay, like, roughly in this market, we can get, let's say, trash for this amount, and like, this is what we can do with it. This is what's reasonable. This one, we could probably bring this line item down, some admin costs, right? Like, we run very lean. So like, we can bring the admin costs down, but, maybe insurance, we got to factor in that it increases. So how did you arrive at those assumptions? A few important ones to look at are your rent growth, your occupancy over time, your exit valuation, your capital stack, your debt terms, right? Your infill strategy and what your budget is, and factoring in any tax reassessments or insurance costs. These are individual levers that can compound and change your business plan significantly. So you want to take a look at them and how the sponsor arrived at those numbers. So let's say rent growth, how quickly are you assuming that you can move up your rents to the market? Or people are going to leave because you're raising the rents, like, etc. Like, what are you assuming there? And it's very important to understand also, like, the comps in the area. Like, what other housing options are there? Is this still a compelling value for people despite increasing the rent, for example? And when you talk about value too, it's like, what are you doing to make this housing product more valuable for the residents? Are you cleaning up the landscaping? Are you taking down trees? Are you putting up new signage, putting up new lights, increasing their quality of life so that they still find the value compelling? Now, okay, what is your exit valuation? It's very much so an art and not a science, because like, who knows where the market will be in 5-10 years? Like, look, if I had a crystal ball, I wouldn't be here, right? But it is important to make an educated guess despite your limited resources. So what is the valuation at exit that you're assuming? How did you arrive there? And how defensible is it? You can check broker comps on transactions that went through. You can see how the capital markets are, what the interest rates are, what are lenders lending on right now. And that leads me to the capital stack. So what are your debt and equity terms? And is the interest rate fixed or is it variable? What's the debt service coverage ratio? Like, how much buffer is there in the capital stack for things to go wrong and for you to still be okay? And it's very important to stress test your assumptions like that. And the next one is infill. Infill is something that a lot of people get wrong because they assume that it's easier than it is and that it takes a quicker time than it actually does. And the reality is that it takes longer, costs more, and you infill less than you can think. So how reasonable is it, right? Like if you have a really, really great world-class team, with tens of employees doing they might be able to do 20, 30 in a year, but you as a small shop, maybe you can do 4 or 5. Maybe that's reasonable. Maybe you could do a little bit more if you're super motivated, but what is that sponsor assuming and how do they get comfortable with that assumption? And last but not least, the budget. So going into the different line items such as tax reassessments or insurance costs, those are 2 big things. So sometimes tax assessors, they chase sales. So that means that after you sell, they'll reassess your property at a much higher tax rate. So that will increase your taxes. And some states do that, such as Florida, they do it very aggressively because the school systems want more funding for their kids, So other people, they don't do it as much. They'll do it once every 4, 6, 8 years or wherever. So it's very important to understand what that might be because that one line item can throw off your business plan. And also your insurance costs. The past few years, there's been a lot of changes in the world, climate change, all that stuff. Risk profiles of these properties have changed over time. So you can't just assume that the seller's insurance policy will be roughly the same cost as yours because they're likely underinsured, and also that's not reasonable. So wrapping all this up, we've gone through a lot of different questions and factors that you should ask and you should get comfortable with. But look, it's not that you have to memorize all of this, right? It's just that you have to understand what goes on behind the scenes and be comfortable with it. That's the goal of your due diligence, so that you're not just taking someone's word for it. And we love when our investors ask us tough questions because it shows us that they're thinking and really scrutinizing the business plan. And if you want to talk to our team to learn more or join our investor waitlist, you can go to cornellcommunities.com/invest. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If there's anything I missed or any questions you have, drop it in the comments below, and I'll see you on the next one.